The luxury restaurant had always been a place of class and wealth. Its golden lights shone brightly, reflecting off the polished marble floors. The air carried the scent of expensive dishes, and soft music played in the background. Well-dressed guests sat at elegant tables, speaking in quiet voices. Everything in the restaurant spoke of status and privilege. Among these guests, a young man sat alone. He was dressed simply but neatly, different from those around him. His expression was calm, his focus entirely on the book in his hands. It was a Bible, and he read it without distraction, as if the world around him did not exist. Most people ignored him, too engaged in their own affairs to care, but one waiter noticed. He glanced at the young man, his face twisting in disapproval. The sight of someone reading a Bible in such a grand place seemed out of place to him. His thoughts filled with quiet judgment as he watched the young man in silence, wondering why someone like him would be here. The waiter had worked in this restaurant for years. He had served important guests, wealthy businessmen, celebrities, and elite families. He knew how to treat them, always keeping a polite smile. But when his eyes landed on the young man reading the Bible, something inside him changed. His smile faded, replaced by a frown. He studied the young man from a distance. His clothes were simple, nothing like the designer brands the usual guests wore. Instead of enjoying the expensive surroundings, he was lost in the pages of the book. The waiter felt annoyed. He believed that true high-class guests knew how to present themselves. To him, reading a Bible in such a grand place seemed odd and unnecessary. As he walked past the table, he threw a quick glance at the book. His lips curled slightly in a smirk. He assumed the young man was trying to act holy, perhaps seeking attention. Without speaking to him, he had already decided. This guest did not belong here. A sense of quiet judgment filled his mind, and he was ready to show his disapproval. The waiter moved closer to the table, his expression unreadable. He placed the menu in front of the young man with a little more force than necessary. His voice was flat as he asked for the order, but there was something in his tone, something cold and dismissive. The young man looked up, his face calm, and politely gave his order. Instead of responding right away, the waiter hesitated for a moment, eyeing the Bible on the table. A smirk appeared on his lips. "Interesting choice of reading," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough to be heard. The young man did not react. He simply nodded and returned to his book, ignoring the remark. The waiter's smirk faded. He expected some kind of reaction, maybe discomfort, maybe embarrassment. But there was nothing. This only annoyed him more. He turned without another word and walked toward the kitchen, his mind already forming a plan. If this guest wanted to sit in a place like this, acting different, then he would make sure he felt out of place. Respect should never be based on appearance or assumptions. Judging someone without knowing their story often leads to regret. Have you ever faced a moment where someone misjudged you? Share your thoughts in the comments and let's discuss why kindness and humility always matter. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that make you think. The waiter walked into the kitchen, his thoughts clouded with irritation. He grabbed the young man's drink, but instead of preparing it with care, he did something unthinkable. With a smirk, he spit into the glass. To him, it was a small act of power, a way to remind the guest that he did not belong here. He walked back to the table, carefully placing the drink in front of the young man. His voice carried a false politeness as he said, "Enjoy your drink, sir." He watched closely, waiting for the moment when the guest would take a sip. But the young man did not. Instead, he simply looked at the glass, then back at the waiter. His expression remained calm, as if he sensed something was wrong. The silence between them stretched. Other guests nearby had begun to notice the tension. A few whispered, their eyes flicking between the waiter and the young man. Something about the way the waiter acted seemed odd, even to those who were not paying close attention. The young man did not touch the drink. Instead, he slowly pushed it to the side and continued reading his Bible. His reaction was not what the waiter expected. There was no anger, no disgust, only quiet patience. This made the waiter uneasy. He had expected some kind of reaction, but the guest's calmness left him unsettled. The waiter clenched his jaw. If this man refused to react, then he would push further. He was not done yet. He turned and walked away, but his mind was already planning his next move. The young man remained still, his eyes focused on the words of his Bible. The glass of tainted drink sat untouched on the table. He had seen the waiter's actions, sensed the disrespect in his tone, but he chose not to react. His silence was not out of fear or weakness. It was something else. It was patience, a quiet strength that unsettled those who tried to provoke him. The waiter stood at a distance, watching closely. He expected the guest to complain, to call over the manager, to make a scene. But none of that happened. Instead, the young man simply turned another page, completely ignoring the act of insult. This lack of reaction only fueled the waiter's irritation. Other guests, too, had begun to notice. Some exchanged whispers, their eyes shifting between the guest and the waiter. The tension in the air grew thick. A few of the staff members glanced at each other, sensing that something unusual was happening. But the young man remained undisturbed, his focus never breaking. The waiter clenched his fists. He had expected satisfaction from his small act of power, but instead he felt something else, an unfamiliar unease. His attempt to humiliate had not worked, and that frustrated him. Determined not to let it go, he turned sharply and walked away, but his mind was already racing. He was not done. If this guest refused to react, then he would push harder. His next move would make sure the young man understood he was not welcome here. The waiter's frustration grew with every passing moment. He had expected some kind of reaction, but the young man had remained calm. This made him feel powerless, and he hated it. If the guest would not respond to disrespect, then he would push harder. He needed to make sure the man felt unwelcome. He returned to the table, pretending to check on the guest. His smile was fake, his words laced with sarcasm. "Everything all right, sir? I hope the drink is to your taste," he said, knowing full well the young man had not touched it. The young man looked up, his expression unchanged. "It's fine," he replied simply, his voice steady. Then, without another word, he turned back to his Bible. The waiter's smirk twitched. This calmness was starting to irritate him more than any complaint ever could. He leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice. "You know, people don't usually sit here reading books like that. This is a place for those who understand luxury." The young man did not react, as if he had not even heard the words. He continued reading, unaffected by the waiter's tone. For the first time, the waiter felt something unexpected. Doubt. His attempts to provoke the guest were failing. He had wanted control, but instead, he was the one feeling small. He clenched his jaw, stepping back, but in his mind, he promised himself this was not over yet. He would make sure the guest knew he did not belong. Judging others based on appearance or assumptions often leads to regret. True character is revealed through patience and dignity. Have you ever faced a moment where someone underestimated you? Share your story in the comments. Let's spread awareness about respect and kindness. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more thought-provoking stories. The waiter stepped back, feeling a mix of frustration and confusion. He had tried everything: sarcasm, disrespect, even open insults. But the young man remained unshaken. His patience was unnerving, and it made the waiter feel powerless. He needed to regain control, but before he could act, something unexpected happened. A group of security personnel entered the restaurant walking with purpose. Their presence was strong, their eyes scanning the room as if they were looking for someone important. The guests turned to watch, their quiet conversations fading as curiosity took over. The waiter, too, paused, wondering why security had arrived so suddenly. To his shock, the security team walked straight toward the young man's table. Their movements were controlled, respectful. One of them leaned slightly forward and spoke in a low voice. The young man nodded, closing his Bible slowly before looking up. The waiter's stomach tightened. Something about the way the guards addressed him felt different. They weren't just here for a regular guest. There was authority in their gestures, in their careful yet firm approach. The realization hit him slowly. This was no ordinary man sitting in his restaurant. The room grew silent as the security guards remained stationed near the table. Some guests whispered, their eyes darting toward the young man in curiosity. Others sat frozen, sensing something important was happening. A few waiters at a distance exchanged confused glances, unsure whether to continue serving or to step aside. The waiter's heartbeat quickened. He had mocked this guest, insulted him, and now it seemed the man held far more power than he had ever imagined. A cold feeling crept over him. Was he about to make a mistake he could never take back? The young man finally met the waiter's gaze, his expression unreadable. There was no anger, no pride, just a quiet, steady presence that made the waiter feel smaller than ever before. The waiter swallowed hard, his confidence fading with every passing second. The presence of security made him nervous, but it was the way they stood beside the young man that sent chills down his spine. This was not an ordinary guest. He had mocked him, disrespected him. Yet now, the reality of his mistake was sinking in fast. The murmurs in the restaurant grew louder as guests started to put the pieces together. Some recognized the young man now, their eyes widening in disbelief. A wealthy couple sitting nearby leaned in and whispered, their expressions changing from casual interest to sheer shock. The manager, sensing the shift in the room, hurried over. His face was tense as he approached the table, nodding respectfully to the young man. The moment the waiter saw this, his heart pounded harder. The manager's posture, his nervous energy, it all pointed to one thing. This guest was someone important. Then the truth hit him like a wave. This was Barron Trump, the owner of the very restaurant he worked in. The realization made the waiter's legs feel weak. His mouth went dry. He had not just insulted any guest. He had insulted the most powerful person in this room. A silence spread across the restaurant as more people became aware of who was sitting before them. The weight of his actions pressed down on him like a mountain. Barron remained calm, his expression unreadable. He had not raised his voice, had not reacted in anger. But somehow, his silence was louder than any words could ever be. The waiter stood frozen, realizing there was no way to undo what he had done. The weight of his mistake crushed the waiter. His breath felt short, his hands shaky. The entire restaurant had fallen into silence, eyes locked onto the scene unfolding before them. He had treated Barron Trump, the owner of this very place, with nothing but disrespect. And now there was no escape. The manager's face turned pale as he glanced at Barron, clearly aware of the severity of the situation. He quickly stepped forward, his voice nervous yet firm. "Sir, I deeply apologize for any mistreatment you have faced," he said, bowing slightly in respect. His eyes flicked toward the waiter, filled with anger and disappointment. The waiter swallowed hard, knowing what was coming. Barron remained seated, his posture calm. He did not need to say anything. His presence alone was enough to make the waiter feel the weight of his actions. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Barron simply nodded, his gaze steady. The message was clear. This was not just about one mistake. This was about respect, dignity, and knowing the consequences of one's actions. The manager turned sharply to the waiter, his face filled with controlled anger. His voice was low but firm. "You are dismissed," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The words hit the waiter harder than he expected. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. Barron had not demanded his removal. He had not spoken a single word of punishment. Yet the weight of his silent judgment was stronger than any order. The decision was clear. This kind of behavior had no place in an establishment built on respect and professionalism. The waiter's legs felt weak as he stepped back, his world crumbling around him. He had thought himself untouchable, but now he was being removed from a place he had worked in for years. The eyes of the guests and staff burned into him, reminding him that actions always have consequences. Barron remained calm, his expression unchanged. He did not need to witness what happened next. He had made his point, not with power or anger, but with dignity. Without another glance, he turned his attention back to his Bible. The situation was over, but the lesson would remain forever. Respect is something that should be given to everyone, regardless of appearance or assumptions. Power is not shown through insults or force, but through dignity and self-control. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone's actions had unexpected consequences? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that make you think. The restaurant slowly returned to normal, but the impact of what had happened lingered. Guests continued their meals, but every now and then, their eyes flicked toward the table where Barron Trump sat. His presence had changed everything, not through force or demand, but through quiet strength. The staff whispered among themselves, realizing how easily arrogance could lead to downfall. The remaining waiters adjusted their posture, serving with more care, knowing that one wrong action could cost them everything. The manager made a mental note. Respect should be a rule, not a privilege given to selected guests. The waiter, now standing near the exit, felt the weight of his mistake. He had judged someone without knowing who they were. He had assumed power came from appearance, yet the true power had come from patience and self-respect. His job was gone, but the lesson remained. Barron, unaffected by the attention, turned another page in his Bible. He had never needed to prove himself. His actions spoke louder than any words could. The waiter left, his heart heavy, understanding that some mistakes leave a mark that can never be erased. Respect is not something that should be earned based on appearance or wealth. It should be given to everyone. The way we treat others reflects who we are, not just in public, but in every part of life. Power does not come from words spoken in anger or actions meant to humiliate. True power comes from patience, dignity, and self-control. This story reminds us that our actions always have consequences. A moment of arrogance can change everything, and sometimes a simple act of respect can leave a lasting impact. Have you ever seen someone face the consequences of their disrespect? Or have you ever experienced a moment where kindness changed a situation completely? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going and remind ourselves why humility and respect matter in every interaction. If this story made you think, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Every action counts, and together, we can make the world a place where kindness and respect are never forgotten.